Ready, go! Rock, paper, scissors. It's that method you use to make a decision when no other method is agreeable. It's used from playgrounds to boardrooms for decisions trivial to sometimes surprisingly large. Odds are you don't even remember who taught you how to play, but play you did. It seems like this game must have been around forever, but like all things, it has a history, and its introduction to American culture is relatively recent, and it deserves to be remembered. Ready, go! The earliest known mention of a rock, paper, scissors-like game comes from a 17th century Ming Dynasty book from China. The author refers to the game as Shou Shi Ling, meaning hand commanding, and claims that the game dated to the Han Dynasty in the 3rd century. At least one other 17th century Chinese book also mentions the game. The exact origin of the game is unknown, however. If the game originated in Han-era China, it seems to have gone widely unmentioned for more than 1,000 years. It's also possible that similar games long predate that. The book Children's Games in Street and Playground references a scene from the tombs of Ben Hassan, Egypt, dating to more than 2000 BC, which may depict a finger-flashing game with some similarities to rock, paper, scissors. There were many other finger-flashing games with different rules played throughout the ancient world, such as the modern Italian Mora, which descends from an ancient Roman game meaning to flash with fingers. In Mora, a group of players reveal their hands, extending a number of fingers, while each player shouts a number, seeking to guess the total number of fingers extended by all players. The game, like rock, paper, scissors, was a popular way for settling disputes, or choosing who would go first in a game. It was also a popular gambling game. The history of rock, paper, scissors specifically can only be firmly traced to those 17th century Chinese texts. In the Chinese game, 3 gestures included extending a thumb, representing a frog, a venomous centipede, represented by a pinky, and a snake, represented by extending the index finger. Though it may seem strange to a modern audience, there is a traditional Chinese belief that the centipede kills the snake by digging into its brain. And the snake bites the frog, and the frog eats the centipede. The game spread from there to Japan, where it became known under an umbrella term meaning first games of the 3 who are afraid of one another, meaning a game where A beats B, B beats C, and C beats A. According to Dr. Sepp Leinhardt, professor emeritus of Japanese studies at the University of Vienna, when the game made its way to Japan, the Japanese mistook the Chinese character of the poisonous centipede for that of a harmless slug. But that made some sense in Japan, as there is a saying that no snake creeps over the trace which a slug has left behind. The earliest teaching book for the Ken game in Japan dates back to 1743, and a culture grew around it and other kinds of flashing finger games. The earliest version of the game was similar to Roman Mora and was called Honken, meaning original Ken, or Nagasaki Ken, because of the belief that it reached Japan via the port there from China. In original Ken, 2 players flashed numbers from 1 to 5 at each other while shouting a number, trying to guess what total number of fingers present will be. There were some unique aspects. Instead of yelling the numbers in Japanese, they yelled them in a code meant to mimic Chinese, and the loser of the game would have to drink a cup of sake. The version of Ken using the slug, snake, and frog was called Ken of Small Animals and could be found depicted on scrolls dated as early as the 10th century. This version has survived as a game for children, but there were numerous other versions that were more often played by adults. One was Fox Ken, which uses a fox, a village headman, and a hunter or gun. Foxes, which figure largely in Japanese folklore, win over the village headman, who is superior to the hunter, and of course the hunter can kill the fox. Figures are also displayed with both hands, making them more complex. This kind of Ken was popular even up to the 19th and 20th centuries. A third game was called Tiger Ken, which uses a tiger, a famous pirate of the Ming period called Kozinga, and Kozinga's mother. Kozinga defeats the tiger, a reference to a scene in a well-known Japanese play, but Kozinga was tradition-bound to obey his mother. And his mother, of course, is eaten by the tiger. In this version, players act with their whole body and have to enter a room through separate doors at the same time or jump out from behind screens, often while others sing a ballad about Kozinga. But the stakes could be different. The game was also popular as a kind of foreplay between courtesans and their clients. There remains a strip version of the game played in Japan today. The Japanese took the game very seriously as professional leagues began forming across the country. Different schools of rules were also developed. In 1830, a short notice in a Ken book reports that the rules described were in the style of one school and not bad Ken like other groups. The games proliferated in many versions. According to Leinhardt, a version from the Second World War included a destroyer, a bomber, and the bomb that the bomber dropped. The destroyer beat the bomber beat the bomb, and the bomb beat the warship. Ken games became widely popular in Japan for a period of several hundred years. In the early 1700s, some players even covered their hand with a cloth, such as one made with black velvet and a golden thread, modeled after the decorative apron used in sumo contests. Similar versions spread throughout Asia. In Indonesia, children still play the game with the same gestures as the ancient Chinese version, although they stand for an elephant, a man, and a bug, usually described as an ant or an earwig. Elephant crushes man, man crushes bug, and the bug can climb on the elephant, driving it insane or tickling it to death. The kin game exists in all of the countries east of India in various forms. A version in Malaysia uses 5 symbols representing a bird, stone, pistol, board, and water. The modern version developed in Japan as well, and it's now known as Yonken or Yonkenpon. In the late 19th century, the now standard system was developed using the main 3 gestures for rock, paper, and scissors, although in some places in Asia they substitute cloth for paper. But despite its ancient origins, it wasn't until the 19th century that the game appears to have finally made its way to the West. Its first known appearance in literature in Europe is in 1842, when it was described in a magazine and called Rock, Paper, Scissors. But while it began to make its appearance in the 19th century, it took time for it to become popular. In 1905, a description of the game appeared in an article about Japan in the Winnipeg Tribune called Ishiken or Yankenpo. The writer said that while in America, children would play eeny, meeny, miny, mo to determine who was it, in Japan they would use Yonken, using the symbols of rock, paper, and scissors. A card game of the same name, described as a Japanese game, made its appearance in newspapers in the U.S. around the same time. The Sydney Morning Herald of Australia described a game called stone, scissors, paper, calling it a Teutonic method of drawing lots in 1921. The writer said that he had come across it when traveling on the continent. It was described as a Japanese game in a 1927 French magazine. In France, the game has been called Shi Fo Mi, based on the Japanese words for 1, 2, 3. In 1924, a letter to the London Times described the game as Zot, asking for more information, and a reader responded describing the Japanese Jankenpon and mentioning that he had seen it played often in Japan. The game seems to have rapidly picked up popularity. By 1927 in England, the game was common enough for an author to title a book Scissors Cut Paper, and later Stone Blunt Scissors. The date of its exact appearance in the United States is unknown, nor its exact path. Already popular in Japan, Japanese immigration to Hawaii began in 1868, and they likely brought the game with them, so it was probably widespread by the time the islands were annexed to the United States in 1898. According to the World Rock, Paper, Scissors Association, and yes, think on that for a moment, but the game was also popular among the Scottish and Irish immigrants who flooded to the United States in the 19th century, often as a gambling game. It was known at least by 1918 when it appeared in several books by Hildegard G. Frey, The Campfire Girls Go Motoring and The Campfire Girls Larks and Pranks. Frey wrote that in order that no feelings might be involved in any way over which car we other girls traveled in, Yoda, Solomon-like, proposed that she and Gladys play John Kimpo for us, but it offers no explanation of what the game was like. In 1921, the Washington Herald referred to it as Chinese gambling, and in 1932, the New York Times explained it in an article about Tokyo Rush Hour, going over the rules, implying that the American audience wasn't yet familiar with them. A card game called Jankenpo appeared in 1906, while published rules described the Japanese game without mentioning any similar game of rock, paper, scissors. Compton's Pictured Encyclopedia from 1935 mentioned Jankenpo as a common method of solving disputes in Japan and opined that American boys and girls might like to practice it too. The game may have reached the U.S. via Asian immigration on the West Coast or from immigrants in the East from Europe, or perhaps both. It seems to have been known in 1935 when the government's play expert Ella Gardner, head of the Children's Bureau, published a handbook for recreation leaders. The book included rock, paper, scissors under the name Rochambeau. Gardner adapted the game into a team game, with each team choosing together what they will present, before the team leaders shout Rochambeau and play the game. The name Rochambeau may have been derived from the Japanese name Jankenpo. The handbook also includes Fox, Hunter, Gun, which includes cries and gestures. If it wasn't popular by the time of its publication, after the handbook it seems to have picked up steam, as it's mentioned repeatedly. It was again described in 1936's Social Games for Recreation, and it appeared in newspapers in the late 1930s. It picked up more in the 1940s, after American GIs stationed in Japan reported about the game in Stars and Stripes. They were unfamiliar with it, calling it a kind of odds and evens, another finger-flashing game that dates back to the ancient Greeks and Romans that's similar to Mora. While the game doesn't seem to become ubiquitous in the United States until after the 1950s, ironically, at the same time, the game's popularity among adults in Japan rapidly declined. According to Dr. Leinhardt, the drinking game had become highly ritualized, complete with lengthy pre-speeches and detailed hierarchies of skill. There were 24 variations of patterns which had to be performed by each player before each and every game was played, and it became too complex and fell out of favor. It remains popular in Japan, however, especially among children who play it frequently and for nearly any reason. According to notesofnomads.com from a teacher who taught English in Japan, Yanken is essential for those teaching in Japan, even today. It's become popular around much of the world in various forms. In Europe, some play with the added well, which beats stone and scissors and is beat by paper. Another popular, more complex version is rock, paper, scissors, lizard, Spock, invented by Sam Cass and Karen Bryland, which has become popular in part thanks to its appearance on The Big Bang Theory. The 1969 book, Children's Games in Street and Playground, describes a version played in Ethiopia that included up to 8 finger formations, including one that had a needle, sword, scissors, hammer, the emperor's razor, sea, altar, and sky. There is an enduring battle over the order of the words in the name. Across the world, some call it rock, paper, scissors, while others say scissors, paper, rock, and others use stone in place of rock, and another commonly used name is Rochambeau. One traditional story connects it to Count Rochambeau, a Frenchman who commanded the French forces at the Battle of Yorktown during the American Revolution. Supposedly, the game was played between Washington and Rochambeau to decide who would leave Cornwallis's tent last after the British surrender at the battle. But there's no written evidence that that actually happened, or even that the Count ever played the game. And of course, there are numerous books, videos, and articles on how to best win and strategize for the game, all promising ways that you can nudge your win chances up a little more. Popular advice includes exploit your opponent's habits and don't repeat your choices. The game remains popular throughout the world, usually used to make fairly trivial decisions, but not always. A recent Quora question asked people, what is the most important decision you've ever made using rock, paper, scissors? And got answers everywhere from who unloads the dishwasher to who won a game of Fortnite to buying a house. Yes, sometimes the stakes can be large. In 2006, a federal judge ordered 2 parties that were arguing over the appropriate place to hold a deposition to settle the discussion via rock, paper, scissors. And in 2005, Christie's and Sotheby's auction houses used rock, paper, scissors to decide who got to auction a $20 million art collection. Christie's won by using scissors, a decision that was made by the twin 11-year-old daughters of a Christie's executive. And today you can play rock, paper, scissors professionally through things like the World Rock, Paper, Scissors Association. But the future of the game is in question. In 2012, researchers at Tokyo University unveiled a robot that used high-speed recognition to always win a game of rock, paper, scissors against a human opponent. Yes, folks, the rise of the Terminators has begun. I hope you enjoyed watching this episode of The History Guy, and if you did, please feel free to like and subscribe and share The History Guy with your friends. And if you also believe that history deserves to be remembered, then you can support The History Guy as a member on YouTube, a supporter on our community at Locals, or as a patron on Patreon. You can also check out our great merchandise shop or book a special message from The History Guy on Cameo.